Today, I want to talk about ending campaigns. This is a topic that I did a poll and a survey about a while back on how many people actually reach satisfying conclusions of their campaigns. Let's see. Got to find my own thing. So it was a couple years ago when I put out a poll and I asked, how often did people reach satisfying campaign conclusions? I got 2,600 respondents to this poll. And the answers were almost never 26%, rarely 21%, sometimes 31%, often 14%, and almost always 17%. So that means 1 in 5 of the surveyed respondents to this poll reach a satisfying conclusion, often or almost always. That's not a lot. 1 in 5 is not great when it comes to how often you're able to reach a satisfying campaign conclusion. Now, obviously, this is a biased survey. It's the people that answered the poll. I don't know why that would be off from the general population, but even among the people who responded to the poll, that's a lot of people that aren't coming, that are only sometimes reaching satisfying conclusions, and almost half the time not reaching satisfying conclusions. So I want to talk a little bit about what makes a satisfying conclusion and why don't we reach that? So there's actually a couple of angles on this and a couple points that I want to make. The point number one is, how do we make our game reach satisfying conclusions at all? And then what are those satisfying conclusions actually like? So one is, how can we get to a satisfying conclusion? I have a few things that I think have helped me reach. I have run more than 24 campaigns in the past 10 years that have reached satisfying conclusions. My wife and I were talking about it, and I can only think of one campaign that I ran where we stopped in the middle and didn't finish it out of 25 campaigns. I have 3 ongoing campaigns right now, and they're all going to reach conclusions, I'm pretty sure. So how did I make that happen? What luck did I reach that I'm able to do that? And some of it is luck. But one of them is making a robust group. So what is that? So a robust group in my mind is when you have 6 regular full-time players and 2 on-call players, and you will run the game even if you only have 4 players. So I think a lot of groups, and I've heard this, a lot of groups have 5 players. They only have 5 players, and the game only happens if all 5 players can be there. That is a very brittle game. That means that game is probably going to happen less than the times it's not going to happen. You need a significant, if instead you say, we are going to run if we have enough people to be able to run. And in my mind, that's about 4. You could even go down to 3, but at least having 4 people. Now, ideally, you also extend that group so that up to 6 people can be in the group and you'll still play. So you have a flexible range of 4 to 6 people. That way, it takes 3 people dropping out before you can't have a game. But then you can also say, we're going to have a couple of people that I could call who can jump into the game if we want to keep the game going, even though we know we have more people out. And if you can find 2 people like that, these are people who are not able to commit to the full game, or you've come to an agreement to that. You recognize the fact that they are an on-call player. Hey, we have 6 people already, but if you're willing to come in and sit in from time to time, I can put you on the on-call list, and when we have a seat free, I'll call you. So I've got one of these in my Wednesday group, for example, that when somebody is out, I send them a text and say, hey, do you want to play? We have a seat free. And sometimes he says yes, and sometimes he says no. If you have 2 people like that, it takes 5 people to not show up for you to not have a game. Right? That you can have up to 4 people say that they can't make it, and you can still run the game. It takes 5 people not being able to make it before that game. That's a robust group, right? When you can run a game, even if 4 people drop out, you can still run the game. That means you're going to have that game That means you're going to have the game much more often than you're not going to have the game. Now, another thing is having that game at a regular time of the week and doing it weekly. So I have 2 of my games are weekly games. They are 3-hour games, so they fit a little bit easier to the schedule. 4-hour game is a little bit too hard, but a 3-hour game seems to fit really well. And they're at the same time every week. One group, we schedule it, but we almost always schedule it for every 2 weeks, and it's either a Friday or a Saturday. And we do check with everybody that's in a game. Hey, can you guys make it? We try to find the one that most people can make it. But if we have people that are generally out, we just pick one of them as long as we have 4 people that are able to play. So making your game strong, making your group strong, and that it's able to play even if you have people that aren't able to make it, is one way to make sure that you can run a campaign that actually reaches the ending. But how do you make that ending actually good? So this is the second part of this conversation. What can you actually do to make sure that the ending of your campaign is a strong ending? And there are a few things that you can do and a few ideas that I think you should keep firmly in mind when you're working on this ending. Some of them are philosophical and some of them are specific. So one of the philosophical things, give them the ending they want. Now, you might be familiar. There are TV shows on both sides of the spectrum. I'm a big fan of like serial TV shows. Some serial TV shows give you the ending that you want. Breaking Bad had a really good ending. The ending didn't make a lot of sense given the way the rest of the show went, but it was what you wanted to have happen. Other shows, I'm not going to mention them because I'll just get comments telling me that I'm wrong. But there are other very popular shows where they had twisty, turny endings where there were great big surprises at the end, ways that the whole story changed at the end. And I found them very unrewarding because I had things I wanted to have happen. The audience had things that they wanted to have happen, and they just didn't happen. And then you're left with like, you know what would have been cool? Having that thing happen that you were leading towards. So what are you want to have like good endings that make sense, that are the things that the players have been driving for. Don't be crafty and weird with the story. Give them what they want. And how do you know? Ask them. When you get close to the end of the game, say, what are you really looking forward towards for the end of this game? What are you excited about? Hear from them. Listen to them. Get an understanding of what you think they're excited for. Write it down in your notes. And then when you're getting ready to do your conclusion, give them that conclusion. Give them the conclusion they want. Don't change the story around in all kinds of weird, twisty ways. Don't make it turn out that the guy that they've been working for the whole time is actually the main bad guy. Don't make the main bad guy suddenly like, oh, no, I'm on your side. There's actually this other thing. Don't twist and turn the ending. Don't have one of your players turn out to be betraying the rest of the characters. All of these ideas about how to like turn things on their head. Don't turn things on their head at the conclusion of the game. Give them the conclusion that they want. Now, a lot of times in our fantasy role-playing games, particularly in our what we call F20 games, fantasy D20-based role-playing games like your Pathfinders and your 5es and your other sort of action combat-y sort of high fantasy role-playing games, is you're going to have a big boss fight, right? One of the things you have at the end of the game, video games do this all the time, the big boss fight, right? So how do you tune that big boss fight to make sure that it is both really fun to play, but also challenging? And if your characters are high level, it gets harder to do. But there's two things that you can kind of keep in your mind. And it's interesting because they're two divergent things. They're two opposite things that you need to keep in your mind at the same time and work towards. One of them is making sure to design the battle to showcase and highlight all of the cool abilities that the characters have, their biggest cool abilities. You want to make sure that there are monsters or situations that benefit from the things that the players love doing best with their characters. Show off those cool, powerful abilities. Let them do the thing that they really love doing. Get that part in there. That's one side of it. The other side of it is making sure that you are challenging the players by having certain creatures that are not able to be affected by their big thing, particularly save or suck spells or getting attacked by tons of damage at the time or being able to mitigate all the damage they do. There are ways that the characters, particularly high-level characters, are able to mitigate a lot of the threat of a battle. And you want to make sure that while some of the battle is able to be fully affected by those situations, big guys that they're able to tank and not take any damage, or dudes that they're able to banish, or big hordes of monsters are able to blow up with a single fireball, or a bunch of creatures they can knock out with a hypnotic pattern. You want to have those creatures in there, but your big boss and maybe a couple of sub-bosses or things like that, they shouldn't be affected by those things the same way. How do you know what those abilities are? Well, you know because you can run test battles. So as the characters are getting closer to the final battle, try running a couple of test battles that are similar to what you're thinking about for the boss fight, with a different theme and different focus and different stakes and everything like that. But show you what the characters are capable of. Recognize, that person has a crazy high armor class and a way to grant disadvantage on all attacks. It's going to be really hard to do damage. Keep that note, right? Oh, that person really loves to just grab people and throw them in pits or throw them over the wall or throw them somewhere. Okay, that's good to know. This person has spells that are able to lock down really big creatures. Okay, that's good to know. Know what those things are. And by knowing those things, by running these test battles ahead of time, that gives you the answer to both of those two questions. What are the things they love doing that I want them to be able to highlight in a fight? And what are the things that they are going to try to do with the boss that aren't going to work? Then when they're actually fighting the boss, make sure it's clear to them that those things aren't going to work. Like, you look at this boss and realize this legendary foe is not likely to be controlled with your crazy control spells. Don't let them blow spells trying to do something that you're going to circumvent with some particular monster feature. Now, if that feature is really clear to them, if they got warning that they have that and they blow a spell anyway to try it and it doesn't work, you can tell them that. But generally speaking, you want it to be clear to them. If you're putting in like special weird mechanics that they wouldn't recognize, but are preventing them from being able to do the thing that they want to typically do with that monster, warn them ahead of time so they're not wasting their time. I think that that's important. So there's lots of tricks for making sure that your boss fight is going to be a good threatening fight. Another piece of running a good boss fight is waves of combatants. Throw waves of combatants at them. Instead of having one big fight where everything's already on the table, have a few waves hit them first. So you have a wave of minions. And I like to think there's 3 types of waves of minions or waves that I really like. You could do 4 different ones. You can decide which ones you want to do. One is normal group of monsters, where you have roughly 1 monster per character that are pretty powerful enough to challenge a single character. That they can be handled with crowd control. You can hit them with limited area effect spells. They can throw out damage. They can take damage, but they will eventually drop. So that's essentially the 1 monster. They call it like the wolf pack. The wolf pack is like 1 monster per character. Then you have the horde. The horde is where you have like 4 monsters per character. Big piles of monsters come tearing out. Low hit point, low damage, usually some ability to at least make it a successful attack. So you have this big waves of combatants, big piles, and don't spread them all out. Don't be all funky and tactical and try to avoid the fireball. Have them come in a 30-foot radius or 20-foot radius block so that they can throw a fireball right on and blow them away. That's what you want to see. That's what they want to do. Let them get hit by areas of effect. Lean in towards the character options. Let them blow those hordes away because it's really cool. That's really hardly a threat, but it's a way for them to throw spells around, to move around. It's a way for them to see their big effects. It's a way for them to wade in and kill lots of combatants that are pretty easy. So that's another good wave, is the horde of combatants. Then you have the big brutes. Now the big brute wave is essentially 1 monster for every couple of characters. You can figure out the challenge ratings using like the lazy encounter benchmark and stuff like that. 1 big monster for every couple of characters that can be affected by control spells. So they might get charmed, they might get dominated, they might get banished, they might get stuck in force cages. You can do things to block them away, but they hit so hard, you better control them because they will hammer you if you don't. Right? So that's another wave. And then you have your boss. And the boss is usually legendary. If the characters are above 7th level, you almost always want to run a legendary monster that has legendary resistances. Sometimes they might have sub-bosses with them. Sometimes they might have sub-bosses with them. They might have another couple, especially if you have more than 4 characters, you probably want to have 1 sort of sub-boss. And a sub-boss could be just a normal monster. It doesn't even have to be one of the big brutes. It could be like a monster that's roughly the equivalent to one of the characters. But if you have 6 characters, you might want to drop 2 to 4 of those guys in on top of your boss. So there's something else that they have to worry about. And then you have your boss. And then the boss, you're probably going to want to customize to be able to deal with the really hard controllery things that the characters do. Examples would be if they spike damage, maybe the boss can spread damage to one of their minions instead of taking it themselves. Or if they get hit with debilitating attacks, they can move that debilitating attack over to one of the other creatures that they have out there. Obviously, legendary resistance is a way to deal with saving throws and things like that. And then likely you want to give them a way to be able to get themselves advantage on attacks because players have lots of ways, characters have lots of ways to grant disadvantage on attacks. Examples are, dropping like a darkness on the whole room so nobody can see anything. Going improved invisible would be another one. Drawing unholy energy from a powerful artifact that grants them advantage on attacks. That kind of thing. You want to give them ways to be able to deal with all of the defenses and the capabilities of the characters so that the boss is actually threatening. Now, you're not really you don't want to overdo it, and you want to make sure it makes sense in the story, because you don't want players to feel like you're screwing them by getting rid of all of their abilities. But at the same time, they'll recognize I guess I shouldn't expect to be able to cast Dominate Monster on the boss, right? Or I guess I shouldn't expect that he can put himself in a force cage and never get out of it. Of course, he's got to teleport, right? Of course, he's got things that can get around it. So think about what the ways. I still think like big bosses should be able to grab force cages and rip them right open, right? And the players are like, what? Now, maybe if a boss rips a force cage open, you can see that shredding their own flesh, so they take a bunch of damage instead of dealing with the force cage. There's lots of like tricks for how to design boss monsters. Forge of Foes, we have lots of discussion of this kind of thing. But those are ways to make your boss monster fun. The final thing for ending a campaign is once they've beat the boss, once everything is concluding, turn it around to the players and say, 1 year passes. Where is your character? I love these 1 year tales. My players love these 1 year tales. 1 year after the end of the adventure, where do we find their character? And this is your opportunity to hand the story over to the players completely, because you don't care where they're going to go with it, because it's their story now. And they love it because they get to get the exact conclusion that they wanted, because it comes right out of their head. You're not telling them what happened to their character. They get to say what happened with their character. And you get to write it down and kind of share it. And all the other players get to share like where the characters went. Sometimes it's in really cool places. Sometimes it's really dark places. But the player is the one that's responsible for coming up with a conclusion of where their character's arc ends. And that is a fantastic way to end a campaign. It's really easy for you to do as a GM. You don't have to prep anything. And you can still, and almost every time, I think every time, I've loved the stories that they've come back with at the table. So I hope those are some good tips for how to reach an ending, reach a campaign conclusion, and also how to run a campaign conclusion, and the kinds of things you want to avoid and the kinds of things that you want to focus on when you're doing your campaign conclusion.